The U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging will now come to order. Today's hearing is meant to bring attention to a heartbreaking issue. People spend years planning, working, and dreaming of an enriching and fulfilling retirement. Never does that dream include possible abuse or neglect of a friend, loved one, or themselves. Unfortunately, elder abuse and neglect happen every day. And too often our seniors suffer in silence. A recent study from AARP shows that only 1 in 14 cases, 1 in 14, of elder abuse are reported. Even when it is reported, it can be difficult to prosecute these crimes. Survivors of abuse are often unwilling or unable to testify. This hesitancy can be compounded by not having a trusted support system and the perpetrator of the abuse having an existing relationship with the abused victim. Combating abuse and neglect by stopping fraud and scams is important work for seniors across the country. It's especially important to folks in my state of Florida, where we have such a large and vibrant senior population. Fighting back against fraud and scams has also been a priority of mine as both Florida's governor and now as a U.S. Senator. One of the first bills I fought to make law after I was elected to the Senate in 2018 was the Telephone Robocall Abuse Criminal Enforcement and Deterrence, long word, TRACE Act, to combat abusive robocalls. The TRACE Act gives regulators more time to find scammers, increases civil forfeiture penalties for those who are caught, promotes call authentication and blocking adoption, technology that prevents these calls from reaching consumers in the first place, and brings relevant federal agencies and state attorneys general together to address hurdles to criminal prosecution of robocallers who intentionally flout laws. Put simply, the TRACE Act protects Americans, especially our seniors, from abusive robocalls. While having the TRACE Act signed into law by President Trump in 2019 was a win in the fight against fraud-based abuse and neglect, victimization continues and we must do more. We need an all-hands-on-deck approach at the local, state, and federal levels to protect our seniors. We need to ensure continued support for programs that help train those who interact with our seniors on how to identify signs of physical, mental, and financial abuse of elders, and provide services for those who are victims of such horrific treatment. We also need to build out and support programs that stop elder abuse and neglect before it happens, especially on a state and local level. This includes adult day services, transportation services, and meal delivery programs. These programs serve a dual purpose as they help build the necessary trust to create a safe environment for reporting abuse when and if it occurs. Many of these essential programs that work on identifying and preventing elder abuse and neglect are overseen and authorized by the Older Americans Act. For 60 years, the Older Americans Act, known as the OAA, has helped countless seniors through social connection and life-affirming support programs. Over 10 million older Americans are helped by programs covered by the OAA. I'm proud to work with Ranking Member Gillibrand and Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Chairman Bill Cassidy and Ranking Member Bernie Sanders to lead the fight for the reauthorization of this important piece of legislation, which is a critical tool in our arsenal to fight against abuse and neglect of our elderly population. The OAA supports family caregiving services, the National Center on Elder Abuse, and provides vital legal assistance programs that connect vulnerable seniors with the resources that they need. Also helps support local and home meal delivery services, which not only provide much needed nutritional services, but also serve as a critical touch point for seniors. Interactions like those had with an in-home meal delivery services provider are sometimes the only contact a senior may have with someone who can recognize signs of abuse or neglect. It also builds trust and a sense of connection that may otherwise not exist. Thankfully, we are working with the Trump administration who understand the value of these programs. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. recently made a point to highlight how important these in-home meal services are by being the first sitting HHS Secretary to visit and deliver meals himself. I'm grateful we have a leader in the White House and a leader at the Department of Health and Human Services who are prioritizing the safety and health of older Americans, and our partners in this fight to ensure members of our aging community have a healthy and fulfilling life. My hope is that with this hearing, we can draw attention to the people and programs working on the front lines to address this crisis of elder abuse, as well as the victims we are failing if we fail to act. I look forward to hearing from these leaders in the aging support space and gaining knowledge from their experience as we work together to address and stop this crisis in its tracks. Now I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Gillibrand for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate holding today's hearing and hearing from these experts. Elder abuse and neglect is a serious problem that impacts far too many older adults in our communities and in long-term care settings. What's worse is that only 1 in 24 cases of elder abuse are ever reported to the authorities, suggesting this is much more widespread than ever realized. It's a complicated and it's an intimate issue. But what's clear is that we need to make sure the system to prevent and combat it are strengthened and protected. Many of these systems are currently housed at or supported by the Administration for Community Living, such as the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program, Protection Advocacy Agencies, and the Adult Protective Services. As the administration plans its reorganization of the Administration for Community Living and Congress considers reauthorizing the Older Americans Act, it's crucial that these important programs remain available to seniors who depend on them. Today, we will hear about how these programs work together with law enforcement to prevent and combat elder abuse. We will also hear about how Congress can empower law enforcement to prevent financial abuse as frauds and scams evolve to include new technologies, including blockchain, cryptocurrency, and AI. In 2024, older Americans represented the largest demographic group affected by cryptocurrency fraud, losing over $2.8 billion. To address this, I'm introducing a bipartisan bill called Guarding Unprotected Aging Retirees from Deception, or the GUARD Act, which Senator Britt and Chairman Scott co-sponsor with me. I'm proud to champion this important legislation, which will equip law enforcement with tools and flexibility it needs to combat financial fraud and abuse in the modern age. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about ways we can reinforce our existing defenses against elder abuse and pioneer new and innovative approaches in that vein to end this disgraceful practice. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Gillibrand. I'd like to welcome our witnesses here today, each of whom brings important expertise in dealing with elder abuse at the state, local, and federal level. First off, I just want to say on behalf of me, this whole committee, but Ranking Member, we're very appreciative when you come up and you give your testimony. So we're excited that you're here. First, I'd like to introduce Marcela Morado, the President and CEO of the Southwest Florida Area Agency on Aging. Area agents on aging, like the one Ms. Morado leads, perform critical work at the local level and are lifeline for many seniors. She actually lives about 30 miles north of me, right? With over a decade of experience serving the community, Ms. Morado oversees critical agency programs that seniors rely on. Thank you for your work to support and to protect our seniors. Please begin your testimony.
Chairman Scott and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on one of the most pressing yet underreported crises facing our nation's older adults, elder abuse and neglect. This issue is far more common than many realize. Approximately 1 in 10 Americans over the age of 60 experiences some form of abuse, physical, emotional, financial, or neglect. But what's even more concerning is that for every case reported, 24 more go undetected. But that means nearly 5 million older adults may be experiencing abuse each year, and most suffer in silence, a number that will only grow as our population ages. The consequences are devastating. Victims of elder abuse are 3 times more likely to die prematurely. Financial exploitation alone costs seniors over $3 billion a year, often leaving them without means to purchase food, hygienic supplies, medication, or other basic necessities. This is where your area agencies on aging, or AAAs, play a critical role. Today, 614 AAAs serve older adults in virtually every community nationwide. We were created under the Older Americans Act to support the 85% of Americans aged 65 and older who want to age at home, not in institutions. We are the front lines of elder abuse prevention, providing services like information and referral, care coordination, caregiver support, and case management. But our greatest strength is the deep trust we've built with the people we serve. We are embedded in every community, urban and rural. With 10,000 Americans turning 65 each day and 70% eventually needing long-term care, we bring partners together to respond quickly when abuse is suspected. In Southwest Florida, your AAA demonstrates the critical role we play through the OAA-funded services, which don't just provide statistics, they save lives. Let me share what this looks like. Just last year, one of our respite specialists funded through the OAA visited 93-year-old Eleanor and found her covered in bruises. Her husband had been striking her with a cane and withholding her Parkinson's medication. Because she was already connected to our agency through OAA-funded case management, we were able to act immediately. We reported the abuse to the Adult Protective Services, also known as APS. She was safely removed from the home, and she received the care and support she needed. Eleanor spent her final months surrounded by compassion and dignity, and ultimately passed peacefully with her family by her side. We offer financial exploitation prevention through our nutrition program in senior centers. We have helped older adults like Virginia avoid exploitation by her own son, and supported Grace, who was choosing between food and paying her utilities on her Social Security. When 89-year-old Emma lost her life savings to a scammer, our legal service provider, funded through OAA Act, helped prosecute the perpetrator. At the same time, our OAA-funded meals program ensured she stayed connected and nourished, preventing further vulnerabilities. We have Early Intervention Network. Our trained care specialists and partner agencies respond to high-priority cases within 24 hours. Without OAA-funded programs creating trusted relationship through meals, transportation, and social activities, these cases of abuse would go undetected until it's too late. Successful elder abuse prevention requires multidisciplinary teams bringing together social workers, first responders, healthcare providers, and legal professionals to address the complex nature of elder abuse. In Southwest Florida, we've partnered directly with Adult Protective Services to collaboratively review complex cases every month and determine how we best serve older adults together. Ongoing federal and state funded long-term care services is needed to support increasingly frail older adults. While your AAAs are well-positioned to combat elder abuse, we need adequate resources to expand our life-saving work. To strengthen these efforts nationwide, I respectfully recommend pass the OAA reauthorization this fall. Congress must finish reauthorizing the OAA this fall to provide the stability and framework our aging network needs to serve America's growing older adult population. Increase federal funding under OAA for elder abuse prevention and response. Promote cross-sector collaboration, especially AAAs, Adult Protective Services, law enforcement, and health systems. Elder abuse is not just a family problem, it's a public health crisis requiring coordinated response. Let's consider the math. Home-based OAA services cost a fraction of institutional care, yet without adequate funding, we're pushing vulnerable seniors toward Medicaid funding nursing homes that cost 6 to 8 times more. A recent study of over 64,000 clients proves this point. Home health care saved an average of over $6,433 per patient annually, while reducing hospital readmissions by 18% and deaths by 20%. Projections suggest elder abuse cases will rise dramatically as our population ages, potentially reaching 320 million victims by 2050. Every day we delay action, more older adults suffer in silence. AAAs are ready to lead this fight, but we cannot do it alone. We need your partnership, your commitment to ensuring that every older adult can age with dignity and safety. Most importantly, we need Congress to complete the OAA reauthorization this fall. In closing, like Virginia, who trusted us enough to share concerns about her son's financial pressure and abuse, or the out-of-state daughter who called frantically about her malnourished 90-year-old abused mother, OAA programs create the trusted relationships that prevent tragedy and preserve dignity. The older adults in our communities built the America we know today. They deserve to live their remaining years free from abuse, exploitation, and neglect. Area agencies on aging are uniquely positioned to make this vision a reality, but only with your continued support. I want to conclude by thanking Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Gillibrand for your leadership as co-sponsors of the reintroduced Older Americans Act reauthorization bill. Your bipartisan commitment to this vital legislation demonstrates the urgency of supporting our nation's older adults. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
Thanks for what you do. Next, we're pleased to welcome Nelson Bunn, the Executive Director of the National District Attorneys Association. He brings a wealth of policy experience at the federal level and has partnered with Congress, the Department of Justice, and other federal agencies and law enforcement stakeholders to advance policies to protect our seniors. He's here to discuss the incredible work the National District Attorneys Association is doing to connect seniors facing abuse with legal resources. Thanks for being here and taking time to discuss such an important topic. Please begin your testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and members of the committee, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today on this critical issue of elder abuse and neglect. In its 75th year, NDA is a national nonpartisan membership association with over 6,000 members nationwide, providing training, resources, and other information to prosecutors around the country. Elder abuse comes in many forms: physical harm, emotional manipulation, financial exploitation, abandonment, and systemic neglect. The abuse lacks predictable or stereotypical offender. While perpetrators are often perceived as anonymous, the truth is that they too often are trusted individuals and even family members. The reality with older adult victims is that they're frequently targeted because of their vulnerability. Prosecutors are tasked with applying the law to each individual case. This also requires discretion to balance the severity of the harm caused, the victim's vulnerability, and the appropriate consequences for the perpetrator. Current trends and threats of exploitation among older victims are shaped by our constantly evolving environment, notably the digital world. To appropriately address the exploitation of older adults, we must first identify the threats they face and not simply dismiss them as situations in which they should have known better. One of the most prevalent means to exploit older adults is through financial scams. It is estimated by the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center that in 2024, over $4.8 billion was lost in elder financial scams, a 43% increase over 2023. Typically, offenders establish a baseline level of trust with a vulnerable target. Once the individual is lured in and compromised, the offender blackmails the victim with threats. Unfortunately, there are too many examples of bad actors taking advantage of older Americans. Earlier this month, Chinese nationals in the U.S. were indicted on charges to commit wire fraud. The defendants orchestrated a wide-scale computer pop-up scam targeting older adult victims by falsely claiming that their computer or bank accounts were compromised. The defendants went as far as appearing at victims' homes and posing as federal law enforcement to collect large sums of cash from the victims. It's alleged that more than 50 victims across 19 states were defrauded of over $10 million. While financial exploitation is a threat in the digital world, guardianship and caregiver issues are a threat in the physical world. Guardians are usually within the circle of trust of the older adult. When abuse occurs, older adults hesitate to pursue legal action or even disclose the abusive relationship, and victims often remain unaware of the exploitation. Unfortunately, there's limited data and information on the number of guardianship cases involving abuse. Older adults also face a complex and confusing legal system, which ultimately reduces reporting. These victims are often unaware of the free or low-cost options like legal aid programs, pro bono firms, or resources through the Older Americans Act, which we've discussed today. So what's working to address these challenges? Collaboration among local, state, and federal law enforcement is essential to effectively prevent, investigate, and prosecute elder abuse. Collaboration works best when it's well organized and duties are clearly established. The San Diego Elder Justice Task Force brings together the local DA's office, FBI, APS, DOJ, the U.S. Attorney's Office, local law enforcement, and their local fusion center to combat elder abuse and neglect. At first glance, older abuse and neglect cases may seem like purely local investigations. However, many quickly evolve into large-scale federal investigations and prosecutions. Multidisciplinary team models, such as the task force, are also great ways to ensure trauma-informed interview techniques and victim-centered approach to these cases. I'd also like to highlight the collaboration between NDA and the U.S. Department of Justice through its Elder Justice Initiative. The project provides prosecutors with essential resources, technical assistance, and training to support their work in identifying, investigating, and prosecuting elder abuse cases. Last fall, NDAA held a listening session on capacity decision-making and the tools, training, and support needed to navigate these complex cases. I'm pleased to share that report was released earlier this week, and we provided a copy to the committee. We've also launched numerous other resources tailored to the needs of prosecutors to combat these challenging cases. Finally, I'd be remiss not to mention the intersection of elder abuse and neglect with artificial intelligence. Typically, AI voice scams mimic distress calls. For these calls, we can use the acronym STOP. Stop, disconnect the call, don't act right away. Think, ask questions. Why would law enforcement tell me to do this? Others, reach out to a trusted individual and discuss the situation, and prepare for how to respond in future situations. Alternatively, AI is transforming how we detect, prevent, and investigate elder financial scams. Many banks use machine learning models to monitor transactions in real time and flag unusual activity. If bad actors are using the power of AI, we should be as well. Elder abuse and neglect cases represent a collective failure to protect a vulnerable population. Prosecutors see the physical, emotional, and financial pain these victims face firsthand. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this complex topic, and we stand ready to support this committee in its efforts to protect our most vulnerable.
Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Sean Voskuhl, the AARP Oklahoma State Director. Since 2010, he has fought tirelessly to support seniors in Oklahoma. He's here today to talk about what he has seen work in his state and how we can expand programs and policies with proven success to combat this horrible crisis. Thanks for your work. Thanks for being here, and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and members of the committee. It's an honor to be here to testify today. My name is Sean Voskuhl, State Director for AARP Oklahoma. I represent nearly 360,000 members and help advocate for more than 100 million Americans nationwide who are age 50 and older. Combating elder abuse and neglect is really at the heart of what we do at AARP. Our founding traces back to Dr. Ethel Percy Andrus, who discovered a retired teacher living in a chicken coop, alone, impoverished, and really seemingly forgotten. That story defines of our mission at AARP and what we fight for every day: dignity, safety, and well-being of older Americans. We'd like to think this kind of situation is a thing of the past, but it's not. Elder abuse, neglect, financial exploitation are happening every day. These are not statistics. These are real people, names, faces, and life stories, all deserving of dignity and respect. Neil retired as a successful career in Oklahoma, but as he aged, he developed dementia. His family relates to us he was taken advantage of by someone he thought he could trust. Neil was isolated from some of his family and friends. His savings were drained. His support system eroded, and eventually he died alone. His story is deeply troubling and uncomfortable to hear. But that's exactly what we confront every day if we're serious about protecting older adults. In Oklahoma, we've seen the number of abuse allegations increase yearly. Abuse isn't always the bruises you can see. Sometimes it's financial exploitation or intentional social isolation. A National Institute of Justice survey found that 11% of individuals over the age of 60 experience at least one type of abuse. Elder abuse is severely underreported. Victims may be dependent on their abusers, embarrassed, or simply unsure who to ask or who to turn to for help. And that's why federal programs matter. AARP supports the Elder Justice Act, the Elder Justice Coordinating Council. We support the National Adult Maltreatment Reporting System, which collects data to inform effective, smart strategies for future growth. We also strongly support the Older Americans Act. It's a cornerstone of aging policy, and it's a frontline defense against abuse. It supports more than 11 million older adults and their family caregivers who provide necessary supports. And they provide services like legal aid, in-home care, meals, and transportation. These aren't just programs. They reduce isolation, support independence, and lower the risk of abuse. Programs like the Long-Term Care Ombudsman make a real difference. I think about Sandra Madden from Oklahoma. She spent 22 months in a nursing home after she had been identified and been in a guardianship situation. With the help of her ombudsman, she transitioned back in the community. This really is an example of how you can show support and advocacy by helping someone reach independence. We also support the GUARD Act, led by Senator Britt and Gillibrand and co-sponsored by Chairman Scott, which will give local law enforcement the tools to fight financial exploitation. We appreciate the leadership of other committee members on financial abuse legislation, and it's supported by AARP. Guardianship is another important issue. While guardianship can protect people from harm, it transfers control over their decisions to another person, and it's not a guarantee of safety. That's why AARP supports stronger oversight, due process protections, and alternatives like supported decision-making. States are leading the way. ARP is involved in Oklahoma. We just passed the Neal's Law as the example I shared with you about Neal. That allows civil lawsuits against abusers. It took us 4 years to pass. We also passed the dementia training requirement for investigative teams. And in a few weeks, we are hosting our first ever Tribal Elder Abuse Code Summit in Tulsa. Another great example in ARP Pennsylvania supported bipartisan legislation improving guardianship system by appointing counsel, requiring exploration of alternatives, and imposing certain certification requirements for professional guardians. AARP New York successfully advocated for increased budget funding for long-term care ombudsman program that allows them to investigate more long-term care facilities. And AARP Florida supported legislation requiring the establishment of statewide database of guardianship data, which is important to confront. In short, elder abuse is real, it's widespread, but it's also preventable with smart policies, strong laws, and implementation, trained professionals, strong community support, and successful state solutions should be scaled and expanded. We urge Congress to reauthorize and fund the Older Americans Act, pass the GUARD Act, and expand family caregiver support, and we encourage further investment in data collection and public education so that older adults and families know their rights and where to turn for help. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. ARP looks forward to working with the committee to ensure all older Americans can age with dignity, safety, and respect. And if it's okay, I'd like to give a shout out to ARP's Capitol Hill Strike Force. There's a strong group of volunteers that help us with our mission every day, and we couldn't do it without them. Thanks for letting me be here.
Thank you so much. And I think the ranking member is going to introduce our last witness today.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I want to move to introduce our final witness, Ms. Lorie Smatanka. Ms. Smatanka serves as the Executive Director of the National Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care, which represents individuals receiving long-term care facilities and home and community-based settings. Ms. Smatanka has a long history of advocating for individuals receiving long-term care and services and is a nationally recognized expert on nursing homes, long-term care policy, and elder abuse. Thank you for being here, and you may begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and members of the committee. Thank you for holding this important hearing. The National Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care is the leading national organization representing consumers of long-term care. We're deeply concerned about the ongoing crisis of elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. At least 1 in 10 older adults experience abuse, and nearly half of those with dementia are affected. Isolation, cognitive decline, and dependence on others increases vulnerability, and too often these individuals are placed under guardianship or institutionalized under the guise of keeping them safe. Yet elder abuse is underreported and underinvestigated. Victims are often embarrassed to report, fear retaliation and the loss of independence, or think that nothing can be done. Those with cognitive impairment often are unable to report or ignored if they try to speak up. We recommend federal action in 4 areas. First, support elder justice. Elder justice programs such as the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program and Adult Protective Services provide critical supports that protect older adults while promoting their well-being and access to justice. Reauthorization of the Older Americans Act, along with greater investment by Congress, is necessary to ensure the availability of these services to an increasingly older population. Mandated to advocate for long-term care facility residents, the Ombudsman Program works to improve quality, protect residents' rights, and address problems before they escalate into bigger issues. Ombudsman intervention has included preventing evictions of nursing home residents to homeless shelters, coordinating referrals to legal services to help residents get out from under guardianship, and coordinating with APS and law enforcement on behalf of residents being financially exploited. Federal funding for the program is necessary to ensure that all residents have access to an advocate. Despite growing demand for ombudsman services, funding has not kept pace. Suggested actions include reauthorizing the Older Americans Act and the Elder Justice Act to strengthen critical programs, increasing funding for elder abuse prevention in the fiscal year 2026 budget, and supporting the Administration for Community Living, which coordinates services for older adults and persons with disabilities. Secondly, we recommend enforcing federal standards in nursing facilities. 40 years after the Nursing Home Reform Act, enforcement of standards in nursing facilities remains inadequate and persistent problems exist. Complaints to survey agencies and ombudsmen have increased. Deficiencies cited are more serious. Substandard facilities continue to operate, and residents go without care. Additionally, questions exist about how billions of public dollars are spent by nursing home companies. A 2024 report estimated that as much as 68% of nursing industry profits are hidden in related party transactions. Suggested actions include increasing CMS funding for oversight and auditing of cost reports, requiring audited consolidated cost reports from facilities, and requiring CMS to use existing data to hold owners accountable for substandard conditions across facilities. Thirdly, we recommend support for direct care staff and adequate staffing in facilities. Understaffing leads to poor resident outcomes and increased citations for abuse and neglect. Neglected residents lie in their own waste, suffer from painful pressure wounds, and are more likely to fall and be chemically restrained. Overburdened staff are forced to make choices about what care to provide. Understaffing causes great stress on caregivers and residents and leads to injury and abuse. Suggested actions in this area include funding programs to recruit and retain staff and reduce turnover, improving and enforcing requirements for staffing levels based on resident needs and acuity, and ensuring compliance with abuse reporting and investigation requirements. Our fourth recommendation is to advance guardianship research and reform. Abuse or exploitation increases the likelihood of guardianship and institutionalization for an older adult. While guardianship can be a solution to abuse and neglect, it can also strip a person of rights and expose them to further abuse. Too often, full guardianship is imposed when less restrictive alternatives would suffice. And once under full guardianship, however, it's extremely difficult to reverse. Inconsistency across states raises the need for federal action in this area, and suggested actions include providing federal funding to support state court guardianship reforms and supporting research and data collection initiatives around guardianship. To conclude, established and effective programs exist that provide good models for preventing and responding to abuse and neglect. However, full investment in them has not occurred to ensure effectiveness and application for all older Americans. We ask you to provide the investments that are needed so that older adults can live in dignity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you being here. And Ranking Member, I'll ask you, do we normally swear the witnesses in? Okay, thank you. First time I'm chairing for Senator Scott, who has had to step out momentarily. Very used to the Judiciary Committee. So thank you so much for being here, and for everyone else who's paying attention to this incredibly important issue. In Florida, as you know, we are home to many seniors. And as Florida's Attorney General, it was one of my top priorities was senior protection. One of the first things I did was establish a senior protection team. We started working with elder organizations across the state of Florida and tried to come up with new ways to not only identify the bad actors, but actually hold them accountable and put them in jail. Many, many times we recognize there's victimization, but we never do the follow-up or the follow-through. And those people go on to victimize many other people. So I was really glad to see we had someone here from Florida. I think it's estimated that 1 in 10 seniors will experience elder abuse. Only 7% of those cases will be reported to authorities. We were always encouraging those that were victimized to speak out, report it, don't be embarrassed, because the types of crime seniors are falling for and the scams and fraud and the victimization, it really is happening to everyone. With the rapid evolution of technology, it is so easy to fall victim to some of the fraud going on out there. And we want our seniors to understand that. It's not just happening to them because they're of advanced age. They may be targeted because they're advanced age, but many people are falling for these things, and we want them to report it. So as Attorney General, I realized that there were many seniors being victimized, especially on the financial front. And they may not while it was a lot of money to them, it might not reach the level where a federal agent or might come in and investigate. And so oftentimes, because of the smaller dollar, these things were just let go, and they would try and address the senior that was victimized, but that was never followed up. So we understood that if these smaller dollar cases were going to start being pieced together to show that they were larger cases, we had to develop a team of experts within the state. And that included statewide law enforcement, and then in conjunction with local law enforcement, whether that be a sheriff's office or a police department. And it really was kind of the first of its kind, a blueprint for the nation, where we had this statewide expert team. We started a cyber fraud team. We were able to freeze assets, millions of dollars in assets that would have gone into cryptocurrency, never heard from again. Really were able to recover for some of these seniors and hold accountable some of these bad actors. And the key is really pulling together a state team, making sure they're educated in the new technology and the schemes, and keeping that team together. And I was really excited to hear from Mr. Bunn how you recognize that. It's not always about throwing more money at a situation. Sometimes it's about systematically pulling together the right team and making sure we're using existing laws and existing resources. So I want to turn to you first, Ms. Morado. Welcome. So glad you're here from Florida. And I know you work, I am the daughter of someone who dedicated their entire professional career to helping vulnerable seniors. So maybe I come by it naturally or listening to it at the table growing up. But in what way do you think we can better connect victims that might experience fraud due to technology and those organizations like yours that is interfacing with them and law enforcement? Specifically, some of these specialized task forces that can help and piece together the puzzle and develop these larger cases.
So just to make sure I got the question correctly, it's how to better connect organizations with law enforcement and agencies to combat the abuse that's happening, correct?
Correct.
So I think definitely it's a lot of outreach, not just to the older adult population, but internally amongst organizations. You know, all of us here testifying, but also being able to communicate and coordinate those multidisciplinary teams so that we can reach those individuals and to have a process that truly can reach the clients that we're trying to reach. As Mr. Bunn mentioned, those multidisciplinary task forces, but they need to be able to have designated, like, who's in charge of what, so that we're not overstepping on each other's toes, but really collaboration and outreach to the older adults, and what better outreach than with agencies that have already built that trust, such as area agencies on aging, AARP, our lead agencies that are on the front lines in the homes with seniors, making sure that they're providing that information with them.
Area agencies on aging really are kind of a catch-all front lines interface with some of our seniors. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
Mr. Bunn, I'll turn it to you. We really saw this take off in terms of being able to use technology to actually go after those using technology to target seniors. And one of the things that we really struggled with finding talented folks in the cyber world to come and work for law enforcement and then interface with the feds. I'm glad to hear you have a task force that you're working with. How do we take that kind of model so that we're getting those smaller dollar cases and, in fact, building up the larger cases across states? Are you able to do that with your organization? How do we take the Florida model and make sure that's working in all 50 states?
Sure, I appreciate the question. So I think building off what my colleague said, there is an educational component to it and sharing what is working in jurisdictions and how that can be scaled up to large jurisdictions, scaled down to more rural jurisdictions, which I think is also critically important to make sure that we're not doing a one-size-fits-all approach. As you heard, just in like the San Diego model, for example, there are countless agencies that are involved in that. Fusion centers are not often thought about, quite frankly, as an information sharing tool for a wide range of cases. You spoke about specialized training and the use of technology. I mean, there are places like the National Computer Forensics Institute that provide specialized training within this area to follow those investigative leads, follow the money trail, follow the technology being used. We know that these scams and perpetrators don't have physical boundaries anymore. The virtual world is where a lot is occurring. And so in order to make sure that we are breaking down our own physical silos, organizations like ours that provide training to local prosecutors and other multidisciplinary stakeholders, yes, that is one way to go about it. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we want to make sure that we're putting resources where they are appropriately and best used. And that means communication and collaboration. And with the MDT model, an MOU, for example, outlines who is doing what and what those parameters are, which sets them up for success to start from.
To a statewide group as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I see that our esteemed chairman has returned, so I'm going to return the gavel very quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Ms. Smatanka, I wanted to just start with you. You mentioned the long-term care ombudsman program. I was wondering if you can go into some greater detail, because it's a program that I don't think as many people know about, and it's, from what you were saying earlier, seems like it provides a lot of very useful tools to be able to address. Would you mind kind of explaining that a little bit further?
Absolutely. The Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program is really a critical advocate for people that receive long-term care and services. They are the only mandated advocacy organization that is specifically required to advocate for people in long-term care facilities, but they do, and in that vein, they respond to complaints, they provide education to staff and to residents, they help empower residents, they also are there to kind of look at the conditions in a facility and really help to stop problems from growing bigger. They help, to address issues on the ground and often when they're small before they even get bigger. So the ombudsman really is one who's advocating on behalf of the individual in the facility and really helping them to be empowered and get the best quality care possible.
How do we try to ensure that older Americans are aware of this program and other programs and resources that are available to them? What are some of the best practices out there to be able to help get that out there?
So a lot of the ombudsman programs, they exist in every state and community. They are really tied into the state aging and disability networks. Many of them are housed in state units on aging and in area agencies on aging. And they're part of the elder justice system, as we've been talking about today. They're part of multidisciplinary teams. So we really do need to be looking at how we can best use the networks and the systems that we have to educate about the different programs and the resources that are available and how they can best help people who are receiving services and help support them.
And within that umbrella of different services and programs available especially through the Administration for Community Living, the ACL, I guess I just want to get a sense from you how important it is to maintain ACL as a standalone agency. What would be the risks if we see some of that be weakened or see some of these efforts absorbed into other departments?
Mm-hmm. So when the Administration for Community Living was established about a dozen years ago, it really became the hub or the center for the programs that are focused on aging and disability and really helped coordinate services. It helped the collaborative efforts that were happening between and among the different agencies and helped foster that collaboration so that the programs could work most efficiently and most effectively on behalf of the people that need services. That really continues to be needed, particularly in a time where we're looking at an aging population. We really need focus on and the supports that are being provided for older people, for people with disabilities, and the Administration for Community Living really does that. It enhances it. We're really concerned that if the ACL is dismantled, that it will get lost in the shuffle of a bigger agency, and that the needs of people who are older and disabled will not get the attention that it needs.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Bunn, I would like to talk to you about an issue. This is something that kind of came up at a town hall that I did. A constituent was raising an issue about her brother who was in a group home. Now, this was about people with disabilities, but we know that there are parallels between some of the issues of abuse with people with disabilities as well as with elder care. But it was an issue about the gaps in terms of legal justice remedies on that front. So I guess I just want to ask you if you could talk more about current elder justice laws and where they might fall short in terms of being able to provide protections and the impact that would have on the ability to hold perpetrators of elder abuse accountable.
Sure, I really appreciate the question. So I think one thing that's really important is providing, whether it be in current statutes that are available or future ones that are discussed, providing flexibility to account for emerging and evolving technology. We know that it evolves at a very rapid rate, and so to be able to keep up with that, we need to provide flexibility so that as those trends and emerging threats are there, law enforcement, other stakeholders are able to take advantage of statutes that exist. A comment was made about sort of thresholds and federal versus local jurisdictions. I think, again, going back to the collaboration among federal, state, and local partners, then will allow not only state-level statutes, but federal statutes to be leveraged in a way that may not otherwise be thought of. I also think, too, from the gaps, obviously ensuring that resources are available, that's a financial component of it. But making sure that there are the tools, whether we talk about aggregation of instances that may occur where somebody is victimizing multiple people, say in a guardianship situation, or that we're allowing for the reporting in a way, standardized, centralized reporting. We've all talked about how underreporting is a prevalent factor in these cases. And so are we doing all that we can do to make sure that we're facilitating the ease of reporting in order to capture the problem, provide adequate resources, and address the tools that are necessary to fill the gaps?
Great, thank you. And with that, I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of you for being here today to discuss an important topic. I bet almost everybody knows a senior who's been a victim of some type of financial scam. And you hear news about them every day: government impersonation scams, tech support scams, romance scams, grandparent scams, lottery sweepstakes prize scams, investment financial scams, power of attorney abuse scams, contractor home repair scams, charity scams, identity theft, account takeover scams. These are just off the top of the list of all the things that we know on a daily basis. Elderly Americans are being ripped off by, I don't know what kind of person rips off an elderly person with a clean conscience. They're just terrible. But now we have a new scam, deepfake scams, that I have a great deal of concern about, and have actually introduced legislation that would prevent deepfake scams to provide best practices on how we can protect seniors on these issues. AARP has said that the rise of AI-driven fraud poses significant risks. And so, Mr. Bunn, I just wanted to ask you, what are prosecutors working on as it relates to AI scams, and what gaps exist, and how can we address it?
Yeah, so in your own state, you've seen some state-level legislation looking at deepfakes as well, and I know you're familiar with that. So I think there are a number of things. As I mentioned to Senator Kim for his question, we have to keep up with evolving technology, and you're right that deepfakes are quite prevalent now and are only growing. I think also it's important to understand how the bad actors are utilizing those to their advantage, and that we're getting at the foundation of that technology and not just playing whack-a-mole with one thing to another. I think that, again, involves flexibility. I also think as we see AI advance, recently the passage of the Genius Act provided some frameworks around cryptocurrency and other issues around AI, and I believe that providing a framework and a better structure to operate within will flush out the bad actors and provide for the necessary tools and resources to then manage the ever-growing problem of AI. But we should also use it to our advantage. We can't just sit back and let bad actors use it. How can we use it on an offensive front to hold these bad actors accountable, and then our members prosecuting them accordingly to make sure that they are being held accountable for their communities?
Are the platforms where a lot of these scams occur, they can be email, text message, they can also be in a variety of are we doing enough to create awareness on those platforms, and can companies do more?
I don't think we're doing enough for awareness, and I think that the educational component of this, both for law enforcement, stakeholders, and broader communities, those impacted by these crimes, could be a more comprehensive approach. That's coordination and communication. That's creative ways of providing information on the latest scams from a prosecution perspective. That's also prosecutors being in their communities and educating their communities on what the latest scams are they're seeing, and making sure that they know if an individual thinks that they are being taken advantage of or encounters one of these scams, that they're able to report that in a way that then an individual is held accountable or a platform is held accountable. And I do believe that companies can do more.
Yeah, awareness is so important. Nobody from government is ever going to ask you to pay for something with a gift card. We're not going to be doing those kinds of things, and the more we can make people aware of the scams that are going on, I think that eyes can be wide open. And it's also informing the children of grandparents and grandchildren to help them make their elderly family members aware. Let me ask about banks, credit unions, private sector, technology firms. Are financial industries doing enough, and what more can they do?
I think all actors and stakeholders in this space can do more. And I think with financial institutions, we talked about AI and the ability to both proactively and look at what is happening and identify unusual activity that may be occurring for an individual's accounts. And then also proactively use AI to relieve some of the administrative burden of following the trail that leads to these bad actors, whether it be a single individual or a group of individuals, which we are seeing that growing criminal enterprise. It's more than one person. And there are other offenses, not just in the elder abuse and neglect, it's growing beyond that. And so I think that's critically important. I think financial institutions can do more as well. I also think that that is breaking down the silos among these different actors and making sure that we're all communicating and sharing information in a way that is a comprehensive approach, because silos don't help anyone.
Yeah, thank you all for being here today, for the work that you do to create awareness and protection from elder abuse. And I think you probably would all agree it's just awareness and educating people about what's out there and taking the time to not assume that we're protecting them, but actually doing something to help the elder family members, friends in your life to understand that these threats are out there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ranking Member Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask about a piece of legislation that we just wrote called the GUARD Act. Mr. Voskuhl, thank you for your support of our guarding unprotected aging retirees from deception of the GUARD Act. Last year, seniors lost approximately $2.8 billion to crypto scams. I literally had a friend who was listening to a scammer, went to her bank, took out $10,000, got in a taxi cab to take her from New York City to New Jersey to an ATM to load money in to pay the scammer. And thank God the machine got clogged. And so she only lost $1,000 of her $10,000. But this is a very highly educated woman who was, absolutely convinced that she needed to do this. And it's crazy because they don't understand crypto. They don't know what a crypto ATM is. They don't know where the money's going or what it's doing, but they especially don't recognize that once it's gone, it's gone. And I really am concerned about the lack of not only awareness, but the lack of public service announcements. And just as you said, Mr. Bunn, the fact that the platforms do nothing to warn about this type of scam. So back to the question. Mr. Voskuhl, can you expand on how the GUARD Act will help hold modern scammers accountable and the positive impact this will have on older adults?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. And thank you for leading out on this important issue, this legislation. Thank you, Chairman Scott, for co-sponsoring. We hear every day of individuals, elders who are defrauded, lose their money. They go to local law enforcement, and they're many times told there's nothing they can do, so they're dejected. We hear it through the ARP helpline. It's a big concern. So we think this legislation will go a long way in helping train local law enforcement and provide them the support and training that they need to make sure that they can help identify victims of abuse, financial abuse. You also touched on cryptocurrency, and I might just point out that I believe there's around a dozen states that have taken on fighting that. That's the new fraud out there. Instead of paying with gift cards, it's taking your cash out and putting it in a cryptocurrency ATM like you referenced. So there's probably a dozen states, and I can get you the correct number of states that have taken that on this year and passed state legislation to put some daily limits and some oversight over those ATM machines. And we do have numbers of how many of those ATM machines are in the states. But that's a real growing concern that we see through our Fraud Watch network. Also, the ARP, the Bank First program, earlier there was talk about, how do we in the financial sector help? Many times that teller and those bank employees know those individuals they go to the bank. So we've got a program that helps provide education and training to bankers and their employees through the Bank Safe program, and we're happy to provide any additional information on that. While that's an outreach campaign, I know in our state of Oklahoma, our bankers are very receptive in helping protect their clients from signs they see of someone financially exploiting them.
Thank you. Mr. Bunn, do you want to add to that answer?
I'm happy to, and we appreciate your team also flagging the introduction of your new bill, and NDA is happy to support that as well as it grows in its effort to move forward. I think, too, as we look at the ability for law enforcement to not only be aware but be trained appropriately to counter these emerging technological threats, that's just critically important. We've talked extensively today about awareness. We've talked extensively about the ability to identify the challenges that are in front of us.
Yeah.
When I was talking to your team, I equated it to many years ago when you sort of have the identification of human trafficking victims and how we are going about training law enforcement and giving them the resources to identify common aspects of a trafficked victim. Well, they're common aspects of an individual who's being taken advantage of as an older adult as well. And so being able to identify those and empower law enforcement to be able to move forward with that is critically important. And so the legislation does that in the context of some of the latest scams we're seeing that are growing in the crypto space.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bunn, let me ask you a question. What if you got a letter and it was from, it looked like some law firm, and it came from Canada, and it said, there's a person with your same last name. We have not figured out whether they're related to you or not, but there's $10 million that we could possibly share here if we could help you prove that you're some sort of relative. And then you got on, the internet and you looked up the law firm, and there's no list of lawyers there, but it's a beautiful little website. What would you recommend people doing?
It's a great question, and it happens all too often. I similarly get mortgage mailings at my own house that looks pretty realistic. And so I think whether it's the law firm that in Canada or other scams, I think first and foremost, we need to provide outlets to where that, as we talked about, this educational awareness campaign. I would hope, as I mentioned in the testimony, sort of that STOP acronym, where you sort of stop for a minute to think about, okay, what seems off here? Why would they be sending this to me? Maybe I should check in with a family member that I do know and do trust to be able to say, hey, I don't think that's the best thing that we should be doing here. I have had family members that have fallen potentially to be a victim who called me and said, what's this about? And I said, it's spam. It is a scam. Do not move forward. And so it happens to anyone and everyone. There are no boundaries. And so it takes a network of resources and information to try to prevent it. And then trying from the enforcement side, any tools law enforcement can have to track down where that may be coming from and the ability to hold bad actors accountable, those tools are critically important.
Yeah. Ms. Morado, can you talk about some of the signs a senior is experiencing abuse and why programs offered by the Older Americans Act are important?
Yes, thank you. So the Older Americans Act is important. We have Title VII, elder abuse prevention programs. We provide education to some of what was alluded to. We do provide education to businesses, local partners to increase awareness in regards to older abuse. But whenever we are able to spot abuse is through some of the services that we're providing in a home. You know, we have trained individuals, trained specialists that go into the home and are able to identify those red flags of abuse because they're trained. And also, as seniors attend our congregate meal sites, those specialists at those congregate meal sites are also able to identify those signs of abuse, either a malnutrition due to self-neglect, financial abuse. Because of that trust that they've built with the specialists, they'll be able to feel more comfortable in disclosing, you know, my son's been taking, you know, my savings or stuff like that. And then also the home delivered meals, when that's another set of eyes going into the home and being able to identify, okay, the meals are still sitting outside the door. Something must be going on with this older adult. So definitely the Older Americans Act funding provides funding for all of these programs that, you know, set another set of eyes for the older adults receiving them.
So, Mr. Voskuhl, what policies, what are you most proud of? What policy are you most proud of? You can say, boy, if everybody did right, if everybody did around the country this, it would have a biggest impact.
The Older Americans Act reauthorization, it really is a cornerstone of our aging policy. So I'd have to probably go and say, because the programming they provide make a difference. And it's a strong investment in the communities by helping older adults, helping them live independently, and keeping them out of costly institutional care. So not only is they're on the front line helping individuals and older adults every day, it's a smart, strong investment that saves money.
Ms. Osbrooks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for hosting this hearing. I want to thank Ranking Member Gillibrand, and to each of our witnesses, thank you so much for being here today. What we know is elder abuse is a silent crisis, and it impacts millions of older Americans, many of whom suffer in isolation and without recourse. Whether it's financial exploitation, physical or emotional abuse, or neglect in care facilities, our seniors are still falling through the cracks and are vulnerable to mistreatment. I, like probably many of the people who are here, I'm a part of the sandwich generation, which means that I am raising both a college-age daughter while also supporting my aging parents. And I, like many families, I'm very concerned about my parents as they age, whether they will be safe and secure. And as we talk about this particular issue of elder abuse, is one I dealt with firsthand as a former prosecutor, as the elected prosecutor. I can tell you that I have many, many personal experiences, not just my constituents, but family members. Many of the scams involving grandparents who receive a phone call that a grandchild is being held somewhere and that the grandparent has to rush thousands of dollars someplace to have the grandchild released. Well, these are calls that I've received. And I just worry that this issue is even more urgent for families who are living paycheck to paycheck. We know so many of our seniors who have more love left in their houses than they have money. And these are the very people who have been targeted. Just last week in my own home state of Maryland, I visited a senior facility with about 150 seniors, and this was the #1 issue, was financial exploitation and their concern about it. So I have a question, because what we know is the current administration, in light of all we know, has unfortunately proposed a dangerous plan to dismantle the Administration for Community Living, eliminating one of the few federal agencies that is solely dedicated to protecting the rights and well-being of older adults. These efforts are a part of a broader, disturbing pattern from this administration, which is to fire thousands of federal workers, gutting regional HHS offices, and walking away from our commitment to protect seniors in vulnerable communities. So the first question I have is for Ms. Morado. The Trump administration has proposed eliminating the Administration for Community Living and redistributing its core responsibilities across HHS. In Maryland, these programs serve as a lifeline for underserved communities, especially older Americans and adults of color who face systemic inequities in long-term care access. So approximately 40% of the staff at the Administration for Community Living received layoff notices from DOGE, many of whom are subject matter experts with deep knowledge of elder justice policy and enforcement. So what will gutting the very subject matter experts who have the institutional knowledge of elder justice programs mean for the future of elder justice enforcement in our country?
I think the biggest thing is losing that historical knowledge and hopefully not stopping the resources that are needed by losing that historical knowledge, that information that they store. So I think that would be the biggest obstacle, is that historical knowledge being gone and the dismantling of it.
Be hard to replace.
Yeah.
Now, during COVID-19, during the pandemic, Congress provided $100 million in emergency funding for elder justice initiatives, including adult protective services and prevention efforts. So I wonder whether anyone on the panel might be able to provide an answer about what lessons you think we may have learned from the pandemic and that investment, and what we risk losing if elder justice programming is deprioritized in future budgets.
I'd be happy to respond, Senator. So as we have an aging population, and we are all here talking about the concerns about elder abuse, dismantling ACL, not providing adequate funding for these elder justice programs really would put us at a disadvantage in being able to not only prevent, but respond to the elder abuse that we're all talking about today, including exploitation. These programs are critical, life-saving tools in order to help not only prevent, but to support people who've been victimized by elder abuse and exploitation. And by defunding or not providing the necessary resources that are needed in order to provide the adequate supports for our growing older population, really provides a disservice both to them that are currently experiencing it today, and frankly to all of us, as we are all going to age and we're going to need these services too at some point. So putting the investment into the programs, helping to coordinate the responses of the programs and the collaborative efforts of all of the programs we've been talking about today will make us all stronger as a nation.
Thank you. Yield. Thank you.
Ms. Morado, can you talk about why the meal delivery programs authorized under the Older American Acts are so important in the fight against elder abuse and neglect?
Yes, so the meal programs, as mentioned earlier, when an older adult comes seeking for a meal, they're not only receiving that congregation ability to meet with other older adults, and that eliminates loneliness. And so these older adults can have a place to congregate, play bingo, talk to somebody, not feel isolated. But also it sets that, as mentioned earlier, set of eyes of is this person being abused? Once they've built that relationship with the agency and the specialists that are working here, that means that they've built a connection and they're more prone to be able to confide in any issues that are going on in the home or with any contractor. For example, in Florida, we've seen that after Hurricane Ian, there's always a lot of fraud going on, and the first targeted are seniors. So whenever they go to a congregate meal site or they're getting a meal delivered at home, that is another set of eyes to be able to assist these older adults.
Thank you. On behalf of the ranking member, we'd like to thank everyone for being here today and participating. I'd like to look forward to continuing to work with members across the aisle and down the dais. If any senators have additional questions for the witnesses or statements to be added, that hearing record will be open until next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Y'all did a great job. Thank you for being here. And thanks for what you do.